This episode is brought to you by Early Innings, an anthology of the first 4 years of the Twin Bill. Featuring over 200 pages of baseball poetry, short stories, essays, interviews, comics, and art, it tells the story of what it means to love baseball today. The Athletic's Tyler Kepner said, like a box of ballpark Cracker Jack, there's a delightful surprise on every page of the Twin Bill's Early Innings. This is a collection to be savored, a loving and lyrical celebration of the art of baseball. Early Innings is available now from 406 Press. This episode is also brought to you by Ben Shahan's Short Relief. It asks the question of what happens when men are not ready to give up that boys' game, the national pastime. In 9 stories, he traces the stories of a minor league pitcher holding on to his last shred of hope for a promotion to the show, little leaguers' formative experiences, and a host of men and boys in between. Short Relief is out on 406 Press and available at 406press.com. Welcome to the Twin Bill Podcast. I'm your host, Scott Bolohan. In 2020, Major League Baseball contracted 40 minor league teams from small towns across the country, more or less designed to save just a little bit of money. Will Bardenwerper's Homestand, small town baseball in the fight for the soul of America, take them to Batavia, New York, where the Muck Dogs have been removed from affiliated ball and are now starting to play in a college summer league. Will shows just how central the team is to people's lives in Batavia and offers a sobering look at the future of these teams. The book is full of fascinating people and a reminder of the importance of baseball outside of the major leagues. Enjoy. Will, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing today?
Good. Thank you for having me.
I always like to start the podcast here by asking, where does this idea originate from?
This book was primarily inspired by the initial rumors of Major League Baseball's contraction in the minor leagues that began in the fall of 2019, actually. And I remember I was living out in Denver, and I remember first reading about that in a coffee shop out there. I knew enough about baseball. I'd played baseball through 2 years of college and always been a fan. And I also kind of had, I think, some understanding of what the impact this might have on small town America. A lot of my reporting in those years was in some of these smaller towns, and so I kind of recognized what these teams contributed to these communities and what their loss might mean to these communities. At the time, nothing was solidified, but the rumors were circulating, and it was something I wanted to keep an eye on because I thought there was a story there, and I thought maybe it wasn't a great story, but it was one that deserved our attention.
Oh, and then, of course, 2020 rolls around. And Major League Baseball ended up eliminating 40 minor league teams. And this is during the pandemic, right? I'm trying to remember the timeline now. It's all during the pandemic, right?
Yeah. So the timeline is sort of important to the story. It's part of the story. The rumors circulate in the fall. And it's important to my sort of personal story as well, which I weave into the book, which is I put together at the time what was going to be a book proposal to tell what at the time we expected to be the final season of the Appalachian League, which was a league, low minors down in Tennessee, North Carolina, West Virginia, and it had been around for a century. And there were 10 teams in it, and they each played pretty distinct and important roles in these small towns in that part of the country. And so my book idea was going to be to spend a season with one of these teams or a few of these teams, kind of telling the story of what we were losing and what they had traditionally meant to these places. And that my editor was thrilled and everyone was excited. We were actually looking at buying a house in Asheville, North Carolina, which was like centrally located, a really cool town, but one that would put me within striking distance of a lot of these different places that I expected to be writing about for the next year or two. And then, of course, COVID begins to emerge that winter. I remember monitoring obsessively, the COVID numbers in this part of the country and kind of trying to divine whether or not this would impact the upcoming season. As we all know, it did. The season was canceled. So too was my book proposal because all of a sudden there was no baseball, which was a critical part of the book. And then, like you said, not too long thereafter, these teams were eliminated, the entire Appalachian League and about 30 more teams across the country. So there was no final season, and these communities really didn't even have a chance to say goodbye to the teams that had been extinguished.
I live in Lower Manhattan, Staten Island Yankees. They were my closest team. They were eliminated. They've kind of replaced it with an independent team, but something's lost there, I think. And we'll talk more about that.
Mhm.
But how do we get here? Why does Major League Baseball want something like this? Because on the surface level, it just seems bad for everyone. They lose talent. The players are hurt. The communities are hurt. What does MLB want here?
I think it's a few things. I mean, and depending on who you ask, you'll get different answers, but there are some commonalities. Um, I think one thing is, I mean, there's just no disputing the fact they're going to save a little bit of money, but it's a little. It's not a lot. It's like 700,000 give or take, per team per season that they cut. And it's like one major league minimum salary. I'm a Mets fan, so I mean Lindor makes that, and I think he makes about 200 and something thousand dollars a game. So 3 games of his salary would support one of these teams for a season. So that's kind of an insignificant number given the kinds of numbers we're talking about when it comes to professional baseball. Uh, and I think it gets a little bit to this, and we see this in baseball, we see this in other industries, but it's a short term focus versus what's better for the long term health of the sport. So yes, their balance sheet may benefit from the fact that there's $700,000 less, say, or spent right now. But what is this going to do to the fan base moving forward? I think the last thing I would add in response to that question, as far as what's driving this, and this one maybe is a little more valid. I can kind of see this argument, even if I don't completely subscribe to it, which is this new model of talent evaluation and development, like this idea that we don't need 160 or even maybe 120 teams spread across the country with thousands of players and hundreds of scouts and thousands of games every summer to effectively determine who our next superstars are going to be. We can select a handful of guys, send them down to a facility in Florida or Arizona, run them through some technological sort of NFL combine kind of tools, and use that, look at spin rates and launch angles and exit velocities, and just very quantitative sort of technocratic approach that that means that you don't need the old school scout sitting in Bluefield, West Virginia 60 nights a summer taking notes. Like that it's just kind of an antiquated system. So that's kind of the philosophy, I think, behind this. And there's competing arguments we could get into, but I think that's part of it.
Less depressing.
Yeah.
And yeah, I agree with you. I think that's exactly why they did that. We'll talk more about that too in a minute here. Why Batavia? What drew you there? Of all the places you could have ended up, why there?
I had this sort of aborted book proposal. Luckily, I salvaged the research I had already done in the form of a Harper's Magazine article that I wrote, and it was about the death of the Appalachian League. I obviously wasn't able to go to the games the way I had planned, but I was still able to go sort of embed in those communities and meet the fans and meet the people that supported these teams and tell the story of what was lost and what might be on their horizon. That article was very well received. It kind of made the rounds in among baseball circles. And one of the people who responded to me was a gentleman who becomes a character in my book. His name's Bill Kaufman. And he said, "You're not going to believe it. I loved your story. And it really resonated. It reminded me so much of our community up here in Batavia, New York, and the Muck Dogs and what that team has meant to us historically." They had also lost their team in this same round of contraction. He said, "Would you like to come on up and meet me? I'll buy you a beer. Just be fun to talk minor league baseball and get to know you." And it's about 4 hours from where I live in Pittsburgh. And so I said, sure, I'll try to get up there one of these weekends. And I ended up going up, met him. We had some great talks. He introduced me to a number of other people in the community who were, big Muck Dogs fans. And I slowly began to realize there could be a story here that has some of the same themes of what I had been hoping to explore in the Harper's article, but would kind of carry on into what comes next, which for them was this collegiate wood bat league. And so I was thinking there could be a story of sort of death, but resurrection in the form of this new league and this new team and this community coming together to preserve baseball in Batavia. So that was the origin of this book and what drew me to Batavia.
How would you describe Batavia?
It's Western New York. It's between Rochester and Buffalo, about an hour to the west of Rochester and east of Buffalo, right off the thruway, Interstate 90. Blue collar, working class community. Doesn't really have any extremes of wealth. There's no like very little extreme poverty or homelessness, but also not a lot of, a ton of money either. It's just kind of comfortably in the middle. They were hit pretty hard by deindustrialization. Really loyal sports fans, whether it's Bills, Sabres, or Muck Dogs. And just I found them to be just a tremendously welcoming community. I just felt immediately at home there, and people seemed to be enthused that I was interested in telling their story, which obviously made this project a lot easier. And I think the last thing I would just say is it. I think one of the things I tried to communicate was how some of these communities that are kind of off the highway that people passing through wouldn't ordinarily spend a lot of time in, that there is just sort of a tremendous depth there beneath the surface. And if you spend some time in it, my hope was to kind of bring some of that to life.
My favorite part of the book, it's not the baseball parts. It's the people in the town, and getting to learn those people and seeing their interactions with you and the team, and seeing what that means. How important was that for you to show their stories as opposed to just the story of the Muck Dogs?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that's an important point, and I certainly don't want to lose the baseball fans in your audience by saying this, but I mean the baseball in the story really, I mean, as you just said, it really probably only occupies like 20% of, maybe if that, maybe closer to like 15% of the content. The rest of it is talking about this community that forms in support of the team in the bleachers. And for each game, I would say I probably only actually spent 2 or 3 innings kind of in the dugout following the game closely. And then the other 6 innings I'd be in the stands with the people I had grown to know watching the games. And their stories, you're right, are equally, if not more important, because the whole point is I think I'm trying to communicate what these teams deliver to a community as kind of just this affordable gathering place where people can meet and get to know each other. And it's distinct. I mean, I lived in Manhattan. I'm a big, have always been a pro sports fan, even though my attitude towards pro sports has shifted a little bit the more I kind of got to know about how they're run. But the game day experience is very different. At these games, it's $99 for a season ticket. I mean, you're lucky if that gets you an upper deck seat now to a lot of major pro sports. And that's for an entire season. It's affordable to everyone in this community. Logistically, it's a lot easier. It's just a small ballpark that's within walking distance of a lot of the homes of the people who go every day. And I was really struck by sort of the intergenerational element of that. You have 80-year-olds, grandparents, you have their children. So it's not uncommon to have like 3 generations of a family there almost every night of the summer. You're not going to find that at Citi Field or Yankee Stadium, really, just because it's expensive. It's harder for older people to get there. You're parking far away. It's expensive. You got to somehow get to the seats. That's not easy for an 80-year-old. And so there's just aspects of it that are very different, and that I think offer something that important to these towns.
You kind of mentioned that your opinion has changed on Major League Baseball. Do you feel that the people of Batavia feel the same way about Major League Baseball now?
Yeah, I mean, I do think they've alienated a lot of their, in some cases, most loyal fans. I mean, thinking back, this isn't Batavia, but one of the guys I got to know really well researching the Appalachian League article down in North Carolina, and there's parallels with this guy in Batavia, and I think probably in most of these towns that lost teams. He was a season ticket holder every summer of the Burlington, North Carolina minor league team, the Elon College team, the Durham Bulls, and like one other team. So he's season ticket holders for 4 major league teams within like 2 hours of where he lived. And after they stripped away the Burlington minor league team, he resolved, and of course he was like an obsessive major league fan and subscribed to the MLB network and watched all those games. But he said when they took the Burlington team away, he would never watch MLB TV again. He would never buy another MLB product. He said even the Durham team's becoming a little more corporate than he would like. He still goes, but he's kind of already poised to abandon that one. You find fans like that elsewhere too. Like one of the women I write about it in my book in Batavia, she goes to all the Batavia games. We were at a bar one night and she arranged, I write about this in the book, to stream the Muck Dog game at the bar. But she had no interest in like the MLB game that was on, ESPN on the other television. So yeah, I think they are doing some damage to their brand because these people feel like they've kind of been abandoned.
This is something that I'm guilty of. Often when I talk about baseball, I feel like I'm talking about Major League Baseball.
Mhm.
And I think in a place like Batavia, it means something completely different.
Mhm.
And I think that's the thing that we forget. I mean, especially me living in New York City here, where we have two major league teams. I grew up in Detroit around a major league team. That's always been a part of baseball for me,
Mhm.
but it really means a lot for other places. This was in the news recently. The idea of losing the third place,
Mhm.
essentially, for the Americans today. We don't have one. I work from home. I don't even have a second place.
Yeah, yeah.
It's, and it really seems like this was that third place for Batavia.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I've actually made that same analogy in that, we used to have work, home, the two places, and then the third place would be, the ballpark or whatever. And you're right. We kind of with COVID and remote work, we many people cut the second place, so they have one place now.
Yeah.
And But no, you're right. I mean, that this was, historically, it served that role of bringing people together in person. And I think there's tremendous value to that, especially in a society that is as sort of fractured as ours is, politically and otherwise. Kind of combine that with the fact that so many people spend so much time on their, digital devices now. So I mean, to have an opportunity for people of different stripes to come together in person, hopefully put their phones down, talk to each other, and get to know each other. That's really important. I tell the story in the book of how, it brings different kinds of people together that ordinarily wouldn't probably cross paths. I talk about the security guard who is a wonderful guy, but sort of on the surface would look kind of like your MAGA central casting person. In the book, I never really asked anyone who they voted for. I didn't care. I just wanted to to know them as a person. But I could, generally kind of probably make an educated guess just based on everything else I knew about them. And so there's this guy, and then there's these two women, wonderful women from Buffalo, who would commute together to the games like an hour each way all summer. And that was kind of the thing they did that they really enjoyed. And and so they got to know, and they were, I think it would be safe to say, kind of sort of stereotypically liberal in a lot of other ways. And so they became really close friends with the security guard. And so here you have these two people of, probably very different sort of political ideologies whose paths would probably not otherwise cross. And who, if they just met kind of online, would probably be kind of predisposed to start sort of angrily communicating with each other, if at all. And yet, they were able to get to know each other as real people. They'd greet each other. The security guard would greet them every night with a hug. They'd ask about each other's families, and it was just a warm, relationship that developed. And so that I think having places where we can do that in our society, is very meaningful, and places we should try to keep, not try to get rid of.
Well, along those same lines, I just looked this up, but the pub coffee hub, I guess,
Mm,
is gone now. Some of those scenes were my favorite in the book,
mhm.
and Eric is my favorite character.
Ah,
He's a person. He's my favorite person for sure.
yeah.
I loved reading about him and him in the coffee shop, and your interactions with him were fantastic. Are you still in touch with people from there?
Yeah, oh yeah. It's funny you mentioned Eric because I'm still in very close touch with a number of the people. Bill and Betsy and Jenny. I talk to them regularly. They've been down to visit Pittsburgh a number of times since I finished. I've continued to go up there to see them. And it's funny you mentioned Eric because I was a little concerned about how he may have responded to his depiction as kind of this, curmudgeonly, what's the word, contrarian,
Yeah,
in the
yeah.
book. And I don't know if he's read it. Bill just finished the book, and so I asked him, what he thought, and he said he had run into Eric, and I can't remember how he phrased it. He told Eric something along the lines of, "You come across as like a somewhat a somewhat lovable or a somewhat something or whatever, character." And Eric said, "Somewhat. That's the story of my life," or something, or something. And so we'll wait and see how he responds. But he will probably be glad to know that you're his
Yeah,
favorite
I'm rooting
character.
for
Yeah,
him. I hope his books work out, and I want him to succeed. So yeah,
yeah,
he's
yeah.
got a fan here for sure.
All
Yeah,
right,
yeah,
that's good to
he's a
know.
star of the book for me. So yeah,
Good,
yeah,
good, good, good,
that's
good.
great.
Well, when he gives
Uh,
me a hard time, then I will use that as evidence that it wasn't all bad.
that's great. So taking a little step back here, after the teams are cut, there's no guarantee that baseball is going to continue there as it has. What does it do to continue baseball in Batavia?
Um, well, you're right. I think it remains to be seen, and it's not just Batavia. These collegiate leagues teams have kind of sprung up to fill these holes in a number of different places that lost their minor league teams. And the extent to which this model is viable or will endure is I think up in the air. The margins in this business are famously slim. It's just hard to make it work, and it's harder when the major league parent isn't paying for the players. You're responsible for them on your own. Now they're not paying the college kids, but at the same time that the quality of the play on the field is going to reflect that too. So, I mean, I think the most important ingredient that you need is what Batavia is lucky enough to have, which is a really hardworking entrepreneurial owner who's going to do the very best he or she can to put something out there that will entertain the community, and they've done that. But truthfully speaking, I went to some road trip, away games over the course of the summer, and not all of those other uh, communities were that fortunate. I talk about going to Niagara. Robbie has subsequently. The owner of Batavia has actually subsequently bought that team in Niagara. So hopefully there will be an improvement in that product. But when I went, there was like 100 people there. The atmosphere, I kind of equate it to like a maybe not even as energetic as like a high school game. And so for these leagues to succeed, you can't just have like two successful teams and then 8 teams that are not doing a good job, because it's going to go under. And I talked about that with the Batavia owner a little bit. I said, you guys are putting 4,000 people in the seats every night. That's great. But what happens when the other 7 teams are getting 100 people? Like, is that, how long is this league going to be able to last? And so that's going to be a question that they need to address, both in this league and in any number of other sort of summer collegiate leagues, I think.
Is there a reason why Batavia is drawing that many people versus another town who is drawing 100 people or so a game?
Yeah, I mean, it's I think a tremendous reason for that is like I mentioned, just the investment of the ownership into the product. I mean, Batavia, you go there and it's like every game is like there's so much pageantry associated with it. There's little league players that are invited to come on the field before the game to play catch with the actual team. And of course, for each little leaguer, you have probably their parents, their siblings, their aunts and uncles. So I mean, it's a clever business decision too, because you let them play catch, but you're bringing in, and maybe you could give the kid a free ticket, but you're also getting like 5 or 10 people buying tickets to go watch that kid. And if he has a good time or she has a good time, then they're going to say, "Hey, mom, dad, let's go again." And so you've created, possibly 5 or 10 more regular fans each time you do that. And so he does that. They have bands usually that will perform the national anthem, or, singing groups from local schools, people throwing out the first pitch. The kids run the bases with Dewey, the muck dog mascot, after the 5th inning. And then there's any number of different promotions where, free giveaways almost every game, fireworks after the games, just all kinds of things like that go beyond just baseball. Whereas the teams that are less successful, usually they just have a game and that's it. And there's not a ton of people who are going to passionately go to the ballpark all summer long to watch Division 3 or sort of mid-tier Division 1s just play baseball. There needs to be more to it than that. And people like Robbie recognize that and they provide that. The teams that are less successful don't.
How would you describe the level of play? How do the players view playing in this league?
Well, it's kind of two different things. The level of play, and this is probably where people like Robbie, the owner, would either object or push back. Like, I don't think you can argue that it's equivalent. I mean, each team might have like one guy that throws harder than 90. If you go to any single A minor league thing, like pretty much everyone on the staff is going to do that. I saw maybe 3 home runs over the fence. It's just a lot of warning track power. Whereas you go to a minor league game, there's just some beasts that are crushing the ball. And so you just don't see that. I mean, by definition, everyone in the minor league game has been drafted. And most of these guys are not going to be drafted. So that there's a drop off there. Now, is that the end of the world? Not necessarily. A lot of people go to the ballpark and they're just there for the experience and to have a good time. And thankfully, this team can still provide that. But I think it would be naive to argue that it's that there's been no degradation. And as far as how the players view it, I do think that it is kind of neat in that the players, I think, really appreciate the fact that they're like kind of heroes for a summer, even though they might be like a Division 3 guy, and they have little kids asking them for their autograph, and it might be the only time they've ever been asked for their autograph. And the kids honestly often don't know the difference between a Division 3 guy and like Bryce Harper. If you're a 5-year-old, it's still just this big guy in a cool uniform that's spending a little bit of time with you, and that's pretty exciting. And so that element to it, I think, is still really nice and special. But there's been a little bit of a loss. And the other area where there's been a loss is just this kind of magical connection that these communities felt to the big leagues. There was something kind of cool if you're in Pulaski, Virginia, to go to the game and you see the players wearing Yankee pinstripes, and there's this direct pipeline from Pulaski to Yankee Stadium. And even though only maybe a handful of guys will make it there, some of them will, and you've seen that, and it kind of makes it imbues your little community with something special, connecting it to this cathedral of the game, and that's been lost. These towns now can't say that anymore.
Yeah. I think I have one more for you here. So the subtitle of the book is "Small Town Baseball and the Fight for the Soul of America." The soul of America. I don't know. I think are losing or have lost, or it's certainly expedited over the last little bit here. Small town baseball. Is there hope still? Do you think? And what do you think needs to continue to happen in the future for small town baseball?
I think there is hope. I think there are definitely headwinds that they're going to encounter. But I think as long as you have the appetite there, and as long as you have locals who want this to continue, and then as long as you have some sort of entrepreneurial spirits, like the owners that I write about in this story, I think there's potential. What would be nice to see, and maybe we're sort of past the point of no return on this, but would be kind of a similar sense of sort of corporate social responsibility from the big business leaders like MLB, and a recognition that maybe this is kind of what gets to the essence of one of the tensions in the book is what is baseball? Is it just a business, which some would contend, and that's fine. We live in a capitalist society. If they want to save their $700,000, they're entitled to do that. But what bothered me was, if you're going to do that, then don't wrap yourself in the mantle of like Norman Rockwell Americana, which is also what baseball does. And it's like, you can't have it both ways. You can't sort of pretend that you transcend dollars and cents and that you occupy this unique place kind of in the American imagination, and then screw over 42 cities to save $700,000 when you're a billionaire. So it's like, let's at least be honest with ourselves. And that's kind of what bothered me. And I think, it would certainly be nice if that sort of tendency, if we reversed course on it, but I don't know. On that side of things, I'm not too optimistic.
That's going to be tough to put the toothpaste back in the tube kind of situation. There, it's once you make that cut, they're not going to want to spend that money. Is there a path that doesn't involve major league involvement, or is that essentially necessary at this point, you think?
Well, that would be the path kind of that I write about, but as we've discussed, it remains to be seen whether it's viable long term. I hope for the best, and like I said, I think there's some reason for optimism, but there's also some reason for concern. And I'm also worried, honestly. Right now, minor league baseball is at 120 affiliates. I wouldn't be shocked if, when this current agreement expires in 2030, if that gets knocked down to like 90. In which case 30 more places lose teams, and then also that saturates the market then potentially with 30 more either independent or collegiate teams, and it's like, how many of those can survive when they're competing against each other for a limited number of players at that point. And so, that, I think, adding 30 more teams would make it difficult for the existing ones that are already fighting to survive to continue to survive. So, I hope that doesn't happen, but at the same time, I wouldn't be completely shocked if it does.
Well, the book makes a great case for the importance of not only baseball, but baseball outside of major urban areas. It's a really important book to read on the state of the game today and its future. It's fantastic. And thank you so much for coming on today, Will. This was great.
No, thank you for having me. It was a fun discussion.
That was Will Bardenwerper. Homestead, Small Town Baseball and the Fight for the Soul of America is out now. Coming on to close us out is Scott MacLeod, reading an excerpt from his short story, Elysian Field.
Between wetting his handlebar stash with sips of his Hefeweizen, the kid described to the policeman how the delightful grandmother of 8, alone in the seat next to him, had introduced herself to them as the team's biggest fan and had enjoyed with them a lovely day at the park, chatting amiably with him about various highlights of her 9 decades among second-guessing managerial strategies and pitch selection, until suddenly, when it came time for the 7th inning stretch and she failed to rise for the sing-along, he realized that this game would be her last. His partner was not quite so gracious. She scowled under her nose ring, clearly not sharing her mate's anachronistic passion for the contest, or empathy for the victim. She died of boredom, smirked the tattooed young lady, rolling her cat-eye contact lenses. Good thing a cop is here. She was murdered, killed by baseball, tortured, slowly. Kamaji shook his head, resignedly, gutted by the girl's callous frivolity, and by how far off base she was. But then he brightened. "No, you're wrong," he said quietly. "Just look at her face." And sure enough, anyone who filed by to look couldn't help but agree with Kamaji. The old gal's sun-beaten, time-wrinkled death mask wore a smile as wide as Babe Ruth's behind.
We talk to people in and around baseball literature every week on the podcast and publish around 50 writers every year in the Twin Bill Literary Journal. Until next time,